Hi, I'm Mike from Craft Supplies USA, and today I want to show you some exciting new material that we just got in. These are the project thins available in 1/4 and 3/4 inch thick. We have a ton of different species to pick from, and they're both available in exotic and domestic hardwoods. The size of this blank being 3 inches by 24 inches by 1/4 or 3/4 give you a ton of different options once you start gluing these up to make different projects. You can do pepper mills, boxes, rolling pins, cutting boards, whatever you want to make with it. If you glue it up, you can build it. So the really cool thing too is these are pretty much prepped. They're all thickness sanded, everything's dimensional, so you don't have to do anything special to glue these up other than stripping some of the oil away to prepare for epoxy. Basically, you just cut it to whatever length you want, glue it together, and you're set to turn a project. The cool thing about these two is the price on these is a lot cheaper than buying a solid Bacote 3x3x12 for a pepper mill. You can glue them up to do some really cool segmented pepper mills. Like this one, we've got some Bacote on the outside, a Padauk liner on the inside, and then a nice piece of zebra wood on the middle. This will make a really cool little cranktop pepper mill, but there's just a ton of different options and things you can do with this size of material. One of the other really good things about these is it's all kiln dried material, so you don't have to let it sit around and wait before you can use it. Just cut it to size, glue it up, and you're ready to turn. So the project we'll turn in today's video is going to be a cranktop mill set. I've got all my wood pre-cut and pre-laid out for how I want the grain to match. The nice thing about the thins, if you buy a variety of different colors, you can lay them in there and see what colors work best, what colors contrast really well, and give you some nice, really good looking mills. So I've got the Bacote on the outside, the Padauk and the zebra wood. I've also cut these a little bit longer than I need for the kit, just in case I need to true them up more than I'm expecting. But these are ready to go and ready to glue up. So let's clear the table. We'll show you how to glue these up, and then we'll show you how to turn the mills as well. All right, so we've cleaned off our table. We've got our supplies ready to glue these pieces together. I'll set this one off to the side just so we have some more room to work. One thing that's worth noting is with your grain orientation, depending on which face of the piece you want, it might be worth marking these so you can have them. You know, if there's a preferred grain direction or anything you want on there, you can mark them. But because these are already flat and sanded thick, we're ready to glue these up. The only thing that we need to do before we put our glue on is we're going to strip the surface with acetone. So a lot of these exotic blanks have a lot of oil in the surface, and it'll kind of prevent a really good bond with your epoxy. So it's always just good practice to get some acetone, wipe them down, try and strip as much of the oil out of the wood as you can, and then we can glue these up and clamp them. Obviously with the acetone, you want to wear gloves, work in a well-ventilated area. Acetone's pretty nasty stuff, and it's quite fumey as well. You can see all the oil we're stripping off of the Bacote. This is one that's really oily, so I want to make sure I strip that off completely. And then on the Padauk and the zebra wood, we'll do both sides because those will all be touching on the inside. Make sure both surfaces are nice and prepped. You can see just the amount of oil we got off that Padauk on that one side. This will help us get a longer lasting, more durable bond. But that's one of the nice things about this material is there's not a ton of prep work to do. If you're using the more domestic hardwoods, you really don't even have to strip the oil off, and you don't have to thickness sand them. You don't have to do anything to them. Just cut them, get the oil out of them, and then go. With such a wide variety of species to pick from as well, there's just a ton of different options for colors and variations that you can get in just a simple little project blank like that too. So a lot of fun, really easy to do. And you save some money because you're buying thinner material instead of buying, a 3x3x12 or an 18-inch blank. So now that those are stripped, the acetone you can tell is already evaporated on these. So I'm going to lay these out exactly how I want them as far as my assembly for all the pieces to go. Make sure you take care with that because you don't want to glue these together and realize, you know, you put the wrong piece in the wrong position and then you're kind of stuck with it. So as far as my epoxy, this is the white Gorilla Glue. This is an expanding polyurethane. It does require a little bit of moisture on the surface for it to cure and activate. Ton of different epoxies to choose from out there. There's Blade Pro, there's West Systems G-Flex epoxy, which is good as well. It's got a little bit more flex to it. Tons of different epoxies. Just pick a good one. You should be good to go. So I'll get the nozzle off this. And then you can see I've got a paper towel down on the table. Use wax paper, cardboard blocks, you know, something to clamp this on because once we squeeze it together, we're going to get a fair amount of epoxy that runs out. And you don't want that getting stuck to your table. So this bottle is just some water. What I'm doing right now is really only specific to this epoxy in particular. So just follow your epoxy recommendations, guidelines. These guys require some moisture on 1/2 of the blank. So I'm going to do 1/2 of these inside blanks with just some water. Okay. That side's got the water on it. Let's get our epoxy. If you have like a little credit card scraper or something to spread the epoxy or a little brush, that's kind of handy. And I like to put on a little bit more epoxy than what you really need just to make sure if I have any gaps or if there's a little crack in the piece or something like that, we'll still be good to go and we'll have full adhesion between the two surfaces. Especially something porous like this Padauk, there's a lot of voids in the wood. It's just a really open pore grain, so I want to make sure I've got enough epoxy in there to kind of fill that in. Same thing with the zebra wood, it's a fairly open pore wood. And then we'll put epoxy on this side because this side was wet. I'm going to add just a little bit more moisture to it. Okay, and now we'll spread that epoxy. Then I'm actually just going to add a little bit more water to the surface of this side. That Bacote is pretty hydrophobic, though you can see the water just kind of sitting on the surface. Okay, now we'll set this on. I'm going to stand the whole assembly upright. Line everything up as best you can. That's one of the reasons why I cut these a little bit longer than I need. That way if it shifts at all in the clamps and I lose 1/8 of an inch plus or minus, I'll still have enough material there to get a finished project. But double check your layout. Make sure the boards are exactly where you want them. And now we can throw our clamp on. So as I'm putting my clamp on, the boards tend to shift a little bit, so just try and square them up a little bit as you're tightening it down. So I've got this clamp tight. I'm going to put one more just on the top to make sure everything's sandwiched really well. And you can see that expanding polyurethane already turning white. So we're kind of running out of time just a little bit. I want to make sure I get this clamp down before that really kicks over. Okay, now I'm just going to tighten down this clamp on the other side. Make sure everything's nice and snug. Yeah, so the work time on this epoxy is 30 to 60 minutes. You can see it's already starting to foam up, but it's still pliable. But the really cool thing about it is it's expanding, so if there are any voids like we talked about with the pores of the wood, it's going to help fill those in. So we'll just let this sit overnight. We're going to give it 24 hours cure time. We'll also glue up this other stack so we can do a matching set of mills. And then we'll come back in the morning and we can go to the turning process. All right, so we're back after 24 hours. We let these cure overnight. When I came in this morning, because it is that expanding foam polyurethane, they had a bunch of excess resin around the outside, so I went to the bandsaw and just cleaned these up and cut them nice and true. But you can see if we look at the glue lines, we don't have any gaps. We got a really good bond between the different materials. So now we're ready to turn the blanks so we can set up, get the lathe in place, and we'll show you guys how to turn a cranktop mill. All right, so we got our lathe set up. We've got our blanks prepped. On these, I did mark the center points because I want to make sure that because it's a laminated blank, I wanted to make sure I'm dead in the center on each end. That way these bands here run straight. If you're not directly on center on both ends, you're going to have crooked lines if you're using a laminated blank. Solid material doesn't really matter as far as if you're using a regular blank, but for these I wanted to make sure I found the exact center point. So marked both of these. We can put them between our center points, and we'll turn these to round and put a tenon on it, so then we can put it in our chuck and drill out the holes for the grinder components to put into. So let's get these mounted up and we can start roughing them out. All right, I think we're right about there. Let's stop the lathe and take a look. Okay, so you can see now that now that the blank's round, we've got a really cool pattern. I think this will turn out really nice and be a good looking contrasting set between these different materials that we have laminated together. But you can also see once we've cut through a lot of the exterior, you can get a good look at your joints on your glue and see if you had a really good bond between the materials. If you had a bad bond, you'd see gaps between the different species of wood in different areas on the piece. So it looks like we have a good uniform bond, nice and flat all the way across the different seams. So that's what we're looking for right there. If you did have any gaps, right now I'd probably get some thin CA glue and try and have that wick in there and fill those little voids and give you a better bond so this doesn't come apart as you're turning it. All right, so I'll just put this in the chuck, and I want to make sure that I don't have a corner of the jaw clamping down right on the seam. That might try and split those two pieces apart. So make sure your corners of your jaws aren't directly in a seam there. And then make sure that's nice and tight. These exotic materials don't like a lot of heat, and especially where we're using dissimilar materials, 3 different species of wood, we want to make sure we drill this nice and slow, keep it cool. One thing that's worth noting with these jaws is I don't want to crank these down because we do have a ton of different glue joints in here, and if we overexpand this, it's going to pop those apart. So I want it just snug enough to hold the piece so we can turn it and drill it, but I don't want to over tighten that and pop those glue joints. Let's stop and inspect the surface before we move on. Okay, and it's worth noting too, as you're turning this, double check your glue joints. There might be some voids deeper in the material as you reduce the diameter. So double check those as you're turning it. This is going to help refine that surface. And with those exotic timbers, you get a really good luster off the material when you polish it to a higher grit. So you can see we've got a really good contrast between the Bacote, the Padauk, and the zebra wood. I think that's a really pretty combo. Nice straight grain orientation there with the laminations that we did. And with that material being prepped, it takes a lot of time out of the process. So as far as my finish choice, I'm just using the tried and true. I'll be doing a single coat on these. The wood has so much oil content in it already. It's really durable material, so I don't need to go too crazy on the finish. If you wanted to, you could use friction polish, Mahoney's oil, natural mineral oil, whatever you want to use. Really doesn't matter with this stuff. So as I'm putting this on, you can see that tried and true really brings out the natural color in the Padauk and the Bacote, darkens up those nice lines in the zebra wood, really makes the figure and color pop in this material. Set one off to the side, and you can see just the difference in contrast and color between the finished one and the unfinished. Alright, so hopefully you guys learned some different tips and techniques on gluing up and laminating these exotic materials. You've got a ton of different options to pick from. Head on over to the website to see all the species available. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the section below. And as always, subscribe to our YouTube channel for more woodturning videos.